Back when I was in high school, my friend and I saw something, and I began referring to it as a crawler. This was in Rossville, Illinois, nighttime and in a cemetery. I think it was probably late summer or early fall, because I don't remember it being too cold out. It would have been between 2007 and 2010, and I'm pretty sure the moon was full or close to it, because the visibility was pretty good. My friend and I used to walk this loop. We would leave her place and go down a block to a side road that led to a park. We would then turn left and cut across the park to the side entrance of the cemetery. The cemetery and park sat at the very southwest corner of town. Beyond that was just woods and cornfields. If we went straight across the cemetery, it would take us to another side road that then led to the main street, back to where her house was. We made it to the cemetery and were walking the main drive that split the property in half. There was a sudden noise that made both of us stop. My friend started laughing nervously and asked if I had heard the noise. I told her I had seen what had made the noise. To our left, I had seen something running behind the headstones. It was on all fours, but humanoid. It had extremely pale skin and no hair, and looked very thin. I remember it was so pale it almost reflected the moonlight. It moved so fast. Too fast for any human I've seen on their hands and feet, that I couldn't see many details. It was in total profile, so I never saw the facial details. The way it ran was animal-like, as well in that it had gait where its feet came forward, almost between or past its hands. If you watch a video of a big cat or wild dog running, you'll see what I mean. We were both terrified. We just stood there panicking and listening to it move around. Just out of sight, while we called one of her friends to come and meet us and take us the rest of the way home. Her friend, a very typical high school boy, arrived and naturally wanted to stay in the cemetery for a while and goof off. For some reason with him there acting dumb, it was less scary, but I just remember that it kept making these wide circles around us. It always stayed out of sight, but you could hear it as it moved. Occasionally it would come in a bit closer, then dart further away again. Eventually we left. I spent a while researching it and even reached out to a paranormal group in Champaign for advice. The guy I'd talked to had never heard of it, but wanted to document what we saw. We met up and did an interview with him, but the group never did an investigation. Fast forward a few years, and I'm living in Aurora. I met one of my closest friends in about 2012. We really hit it off because we were into the paranormal. When I eventually told him about what I had seen, his jaw hit the floor. He told me that he had seen the same thing and told me his story. He described exactly what I had seen, but he had seen it under a porch while living in Thornton. It was crouched down and squatting. He thinks he startled it while it was eating, because he said it was hunched over something it was holding. He comes from a Navajo/Apache background, and when we first met, his best guess was Skinwalker or Wendigo. But then, and especially now, he said he's had doubts about either of those things being the answer. He was dating a girl at the time whose mother claimed to be a medium. She said she thought it was something that someone had woken up and that it was now angry. We both have serious doubts on that one. The stranger part came when he and I brought it up, both starting having very intense nightmares about it. His were worse than mine and lasted much longer. This was also punctuated by 6 months of bad luck and extreme anxiety for us. I always sort of brushed this off as just psyching ourselves out until I sent my story into a podcast. After it was read, another listener sent in their story. They described what my friend and I had seen, and also described the sightings as being punctuated by nightmares. I couldn't write that off, because he spoke about his nightmares in detail, and they matched my friend's nightmares exactly. Bear in mind that I had never given out any details of what exactly happened in either of our nightmares. I have read a ton of other stories by other people on the internet. I've dug through mounds of lore and cryptid lists, and I still don't feel like I have an answer to what this thing is. My best guess at this point is that the nightmares aren't coincidental, and that this is something that is interdimensional. It seems like it can interact with physical things around it, but I've never heard anyone tell a first-hand account of being physically attacked or even touched. I've speculated on it for what could be hours, and the only conclusion that I can come to is I don't feel like there's an actual concrete answer. It doesn't act exactly like this or that cryptid, but I think it might be something that's been around and inspired other cryptids or paranormal tales, but I don't think it's a Wendigo, skinwalker, ghoul, or fleshgate. What do you guys think? So my husband is a major skeptic, and that's why I was shocked at what he told me what he saw last night. Or actually very early morning, between 3 and 5 a.m. I kept trying to get him to admit he was joking, but he was dead serious, and assured me that he definitely saw something that he could not explain. He said he woke up and couldn't get back to sleep, so he went downstairs. This is not unusual for him. He often wakes up early and doesn't go back to sleep. We live in a row of townhouses. Our downstairs is at a second-level floor, with our living room/dining room/kitchen area, and a sliding glass door that opens up to a small enclosed desk and overlooks a strip of wooded area that makes up our backyard. He was sitting in a recliner that is positioned directly across the room from the sliding glass doors, and with nothing but the TV on. He could see the outside clearly enough, although there is a reflection in the glass door caused by the lights from the TV. I hope that my layout of the room makes sense to you all. After about half an hour to 45 minutes of watching TV, some movement outside catches his eye. He says he turned to look and plainly saw a woman floating several feet away from the desk, just hovering in his line of sight, right over our backyard, maybe 8 to 10 meters from where he sat. He says that she didn't seem to notice him. She slowly floated across our backyard towards the right, his right, until she disappeared from his view. He didn't get up to see where she'd gone. He just sat there and tried to process it. Since we live in a row of townhouses and the area is pretty well lit, I'm wondering how many backyards she traversed and if anyone else saw her. Unfortunately, it would be super weird to bring this up with any of our neighbors. We've only lived here for a few months and don't know anyone well enough to ask them about something so bizarre. I asked him for as many details as I could when he told me that this happened. He felt he could rule out sleep paralysis, or any sleep-related hallucinations, as he had been wide awake for a while, and there had been no alcohol or drugs involved either. As for the floating lady, she was not close enough, and it was too dark for him to make out any details, but she appeared to be a humanoid, female, with long white or light-colored hair and a slim build. The clothing appeared to be a light wispy material, possibly a gown, but again, the darkness and distance didn't allow him to see any details. She didn't glow or emit any light, and looked to be completely solid. So basically, my husband saw what appeared to be an otherwise normal-looking human woman, beside the obvious floating and flying thing, which he says made her seem ethereal. My husband says he's been lost in thought and walking around in a stupor today, because he absolutely doesn't believe in the paranormal, but he can't explain what he saw. When he first told me about this, he identified it as a ghost, but after mulling over the details, the closest thing we could think to is maybe some kind of fae. It's hard to know what to call a strange lady hovering in your backyard at 3 a.m. Any ideas are most certainly welcome. Also, just to add a little bit more, she's been seen 3 times since that last event. Every sighting occurred during the early hours, and he would be wide awake during this time. She won't always appear in the same spot, but usually it would be around our balcony. She also never looked directly at him. I personally have never seen her, but a couple of weeks ago I woke up and went downstairs with him, and he made me eggs and toast. I was sitting on the couch with him when he suddenly shouts, "Look, there she is!" But it was too dark for me to see anything without my glasses, and he said that she had vanished as soon as he had said something. Last night, something very different happened. I fell asleep on the couch, and my husband was awake watching TV. At around 1:45, he shook me awake, and he was clearly upset. He told me that she had showed up again. He said he felt strange, like he was being watched, and out of the corner of his eye, he saw her right next to him. This time she was standing on the seat of the couch, bent over with her face inches from his. She vanished as soon as he noticed her, but he was still very shaken by the experience. He asked me to come over to his side and snuggle him. I had to sit right where she was standing, and when I laid my head in his chest, his heart was pounding. I asked him if he wanted to go back to our room upstairs, but he said no, and when he calmed down a bit, he told me that he felt like he might have scared her just as badly as she scared him. He thinks maybe she was just being nosy, and went in for a closer look, not expecting to be seen, which makes me wonder if she's done it before and checked us out while we were asleep. Even though she scared the crap out of him, he feels like she's harmless, but I don't know. This last incident seems aggressive to me. I think I would feel a lot better if I knew what the hell she was and what it is that she wants. I don't expect to have the answer to these questions anytime soon, if ever. My family often reminisces of living there. A few years ago, over a couple of drinks, my dad started asking me about living at our old house. He used the basement bathroom every morning, as he had a long commute to work and had to be up early, and also because he kept his work clothes in a closet in the basement. This is where it starts getting interesting. My dad recalls on several occasions where he would be in the basement early in the morning in order to get ready for work, and would feel a cold air lurk over him. He said most of the time it didn't alarm him, but on a few occasions He felt the need to speak out loud. "I'm not here to bother you. I'm just getting ready for work." And then he would feel the cold dissipate. After realizing we had similar experiences at the house, we started to talk about the other weird things that happened. When I was 11, my mum had decided to go back to work, and since we had a dog, I was now responsible for going home at lunch to let her outside. I also walked my brother to school in the morning and was responsible for locking the door, which I never forgot to do. My parents even gave me a custom print key and stuff, and lectured me constantly about it, so there's no way I would have forgotten to lock the door. On one particular day, I was walking up the street to my house, and suddenly felt very anxious as I approached the door. When I got to the step, I noticed the door was unlocked and open. It wasn't open all the way, but it was enough so that I could see into the house. I immediately went and got my neighbor, who agreed to come into the house with me. There was no one in the house, and nothing was out of place. This happened again when I was 12. On both occasions, I remember letting our dog out and rushing to get out of the house, as I felt like I wasn't welcome there at all. After reminding my dad of these events, he shared one with me from when I was only 4, and obviously have no memory of. I was asleep in the car at the time. Apparently we were on our way back from a New Year's party. My parents did not drink and drive, so there was no alcohol involved here. And we were driving up our street, and my dad noticed their bedroom light turned on. Then, seconds later, it turned off again. When we got into the house, he left my mum in the car with my brother and I, and walked up to find the door unlocked and open. He grabbed a baseball bat and searched the house to find that no one was there. Now onto the slightly more creepy events. I am almost sure the unlocked doors/lights could be explained by non-paranormal activity. This part all started with my brother, who started to claim that on some nights, he would see a woman in a large white dress walk from the top of the stairs down to the bottom, and then disappear. Their stairs had a sort of balcony at the top, and curved down 180 degrees with 2 separate small landings. My brother told me about it first, and obviously I didn't believe him. Eventually he told my mum, and she sort of went along with it. Then one night, my mum claimed that she saw the woman in a white dress standing on the balcony. Now, she did not tell me or my brother this until we had moved out the house, probably because we would have freaked the hell out. I have a very vivid memory from one afternoon when I was in my brother's room, which looked out directly at the balcony, and I was playing in this Scooby-Doo tent we had gotten. I fell asleep in the tent, and later woke up and turned over to see a woman in a white dress and a man in a suit and top hat dancing together just outside the door. It was very peaceful, and I wasn't scared at all, even though I feel like I should have been. I looked away, and they were gone. Thinking back about this now, my encounter with the woman in the white dress may have been a dream. However, I still find it interesting that it happened. As a kid, I always struggled falling asleep, and often would end up tossing and turning in bed until fairly late at night. I remember one night feeling extremely restless. I don't remember what time it was, but I remember feeling an urge to close my bedroom door. I always left it open very slightly. My bed was nearly right beside the door, and I didn't have to get out to close it. I rolled over, leaned out of the bed slightly, and when I noticed a large shadowy figure standing just on the other side of the door, I froze instantly. I just stared out the door at it. I could not make out an exact shape, but it looked like a human. Eventually I started to call out, "Dad?" Thinking, but mostly hoping it was him, as I was extremely scared to see this outside my door. But the figure didn't move. I continued to call, still nothing. Eventually I closed the door and turned over in my bed to hide, as I was shaking with fear. My dad came in moments later after hearing me call for him and asked what was wrong. I explained, and he told me that he was sleeping the whole time, and so was my mum. Also, it was way too large to have been my brother, who's 2 years younger than me. This memory has been ingrained so well in me that I still get shivers and my eyes water when I remember it. Every time I stay at my grandma's house, I hear someone walking upstairs. It starts at one side of the room, casually walks to the other, and stops. This will happen maybe twice a night. I didn't start hearing it until I was about 14, when my grandparents made me start sleeping in the different room on the first floor, because they were starting to sleep in separate bedrooms. Regardless, both of their rooms are also on the first floor. For a little backstory, I have always been afraid of the upstairs of the house. I don't know why, but it's always freaked me out, and I refuse to ever go up there alone. I'm 23 now, and still won't go up there alone. There's one room specifically, though it's a long, narrow bedroom. When you open the door, there's a closet on the left and right, with a bed placed roughly in the middle of the room, and a window on the far side opposite the door. I was told while I was growing up, by my grandparents, that the sons of the previous owner claimed to see a gorilla coming out of the closet at night. It would dance around the room and then go back into the closet. I thought nothing of this story until I had to start sleeping in the other room. The room which was located directly below the scary room upstairs. So we all go to bed. All the lights in the house are off, and I'm still awake, lying on the bed. Then I heard it. Thump, thump, thump. Starting at one end of the room upstairs. It got closer to me, passed right above me, and continued to the end of the room where it stopped. I'm wide awake, terrified out of my mind. It was no question to me that I had heard footsteps. I knew that slow, casual pace. I was freaked out and went to my grandpa's room. I told him what I'd heard, and he told me the house is old and that it creaks. He turned the dining room light on for me so that I felt a little safer, and I tried going back to sleep. Then it started again, this time from where it ended the first time, by the window upstairs. It walks over to me again and stops when it reached the door. I thought it was over until 5 seconds later, when I heard it coming down the stairs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Silence as it reached the landing. Then 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And silence again as it reached the first floor. I was frozen in shock. Whatever it was on my floor of the house, and sadly unaffected by the dining room light. I was staring at the doorway to my room. The dining room light was shining in, and my vision began to distort. I felt dizzy with fear, so I pulled the blankets over my head, and suddenly I heard a scratching sound from inside my room. I knew exactly where it was coming from. My grandpa's gun case. It was a very obvious sound, scratching on the wood, long scratches down the front of the gun case door. I could even hear the door ever so slightly tapping against the frame as each scratch began. I tried to scream, and I couldn't. I took a second to take a deep breath and let out a loud scream. In seconds, my grandpa had made it to my room, and I was relieved. Needless to say, he didn't believe me, so I did what any normal person would do. I draped a sheet over the side of the bed and slept underneath it. I wrapped myself tight in a comforter, put on headphones, and turned my back to the door. There could be a party of ghosts in my room, and I wouldn't even know. The next morning, my grandpa told my grandma about what happened the night before. She said, "Oh, that's silly. You know, your cousin woke up the last time she stayed here. She came in my room saying that she heard footsteps. I ended up sleeping under the bed for the rest of my stay. I've stayed there countless times since that happened, and I hear the footsteps every time. I sleep on top of the bed now, but keep my back to the door and sleep with my headphones on. I haven't heard it come down the stairs since that first night, but if it does, I don't want to know." This took place a few months ago, in mid-November. It was in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. My girlfriend-to-be and another couple she was friends with at the time and I were all hanging out. Being teenagers who enjoy trying our luck, all four of us decided to take a trip to Riverside Cemetery on the north side of town. Now, I've been to this cemetery searching for stuff myself before, and I had never had much more than the occasional expected sign of spirits being nearby, such as white spots or orbs in photographs, or the occasional time where my camera would suddenly say low battery whilst powering down, even though I always made sure to change the batteries before we came and reduce shutter speed. So naturally, I thought nothing more likely would happen this time. However, such was definitely not the case. I could tell the second that we arrived at the cemetery that something was different. There was something about the way the air felt. The atmosphere was entirely different than usual. It was so much more energetic than normal. The four of us got out of the car because the other three wanted to look around a little bit. I wasn't too keen on this idea at first, but I decided I didn't want to look weak in front of the girl I liked. So we got out. I brought something I used for communication called dowsing rods. They're pretty cool. They're held horizontally, and spirits can move them based on questions you ask. They're pretty cool if you're a paranormal enthusiast. Well, we get out of the car, and we begin to use the dowsing rods. I start asking some questions, and then the girl I liked asks to use them, so I hand them over to her. She asks a few questions before the guy in the couple she invited asks to use them too. I say fine. He asks some more questions, and like the past two of us, the questions are answered, but nothing too extreme happens. At this point, the girl in the couple invited, Emily, is the only person who hasn't used the rods yet, and didn't want to, but the rest of us pressure her into doing so. When she asked her questions though, the rods quickly whipped around to answer, rather than slowly like for the three of us. So I take the rods back and ask the spirit if it liked her, to which the answer was yes. Then, because I'm starting to get suspicious, I ask if it's a benevolent spirit, to which it answers no. I freak out quickly, close the session, and put the rods away. Emily is beginning to freak out, and so I have to comfort her. Meanwhile, the other two wander off in the headstones because they want to do some headstone rubbing. I'm starting to really feel the hairs on my neck prick up, and it's making me quite anxious, which is when I begin to see things. Out of the corner of my eyes, I see black figures fitting in between the headstones, and this is really making me nervous. Mind you, the other two were on the other side of the cemetery at this point, and I had a clear line of vision of them, so it couldn't have been them. I tell Emily, and she and I quickly run to catch up with the others, having decided that splitting up is no longer a good idea. This is where things get really freaky. After a few moments of being out in the headstones, I hear something. It's so difficult to describe, yet it fills me with fear every time I have to describe it. It was a loud scream off in the distance, and it could have been a person's scream, despite the fact it was so animalistic, full of fury and rage, and sounded so inhuman from the rasp. But the tenor of the scream and the pure fury that sounded like a soul being dragged directly to hell. Not to mention that it came from the woods adjacent to the cemetery. I give the others a look, who look back at me with the exact same expression of pure terror on their faces, and we begin sprinting straight to the car. We begin to take Emily to her house. We turn on the GPS and follow the directions. However, it wasn't before Emily pipes up from the back seat, saying, "This isn't how you get to my house." So we begin looking down at a step-by-step directional, and she's scrolling down, and the list keeps going. After 30 seconds, the directions were coming. Her house is only 3/4 of a mile from the cemetery, so there's no way the directions are accurate. We follow the directions, and for a few moments, we realize that they're taking us further from her house. We think maybe this isn't the best idea, and have her tell us how to get to her house from memory. We get there, drop her off, and try to use the GPS to get to my house, but it was the same thing. It was giving us endless weird directions, and we had to turn it off. That scream still haunts me. I wish I could impress upon all of you how tortured and demonic and utterly inhuman this scream was. Furthermore, Emily would later tell us that night, after we dropped her off at her house, one of her favorite plants was thrown off her dresser and smashed to the floor. When I was about 8, my family moved into a new house. There were 2 bedrooms on the 2nd level and 1 downstairs, and my new bedroom was the master bedroom upstairs. I loved the room for its size, but also found it creepy. What was most creepy for me was the storage units built into the wall. They made me feel very uneasy. This unease/terrified feeling was there every night when lights would go out. At the time, I thought I was just a kid who was scared at night because the room was big and new. That soon changed when I started waking up every night, early in the morning, feeling like someone else was in the room with me. I would run and turn on my light, see nothing, but fall back asleep with the light on, waking up with it that way in the morning. This continued every night for quite some time. My bed was against a wall, and one night when I had just gotten into bed after turning off the lights, I started falling asleep close to the edge of the bed. As I went to roll over and face the wall, half asleep, there was a face of a smiling old woman that quickly vanished. I jumped out of the bed, turned on the light finding nothing, and I woke my parents and they said it was a dream. From that night on, I slept with my back pressed to the wall to prevent the same thing from happening again. That was my first sighting. Shortly after that, we got a cat. The first night we had her, she came into my room early in the morning, after I was already sitting up with the light on. First thing she did was go over to the storage unit. Actually, she crept over to it, sniffing the whole way there, her eyes wide and tail up and fluffy. When she got to the door, still sniffing, I heard a voice whisper, "Hi," and she bolted from the room. I knew I wasn't imagining it, because she clearly heard it too, and I slept on the couch that night. The nights following, I didn't want to sleep in my room, but after my parents had caught me on the couch after the cat incident, they told me I had to sleep there, and it was my imagination at night. The next encounter started off like the others. I awoke early in the morning, as I usually did, except I was very cold and I felt like someone was watching me. So I rubbed my eyes and sat up. Standing in the middle of my room by the storage door was a man who seemed to be transparent and lit up glowing an almost bluish color. He was heavy-set, with black, thick-rimmed glasses, in camo pants, a hat, and a camo jacket, with a white t-shirt. He was holding his hand over his stomach. He looked at me, then he looked down at his stomach, and moved his hand/jacket to reveal a wound and blood. He looked back up, making eye contact, with a, again, confused expression on his face, and I ran out of the room with my blankets. I slept on the couch that night, not caring if I got into trouble in the morning. I told my parents the next day, but they told me it wasn't real, and I was probably dreaming, and I had to sleep in my room. Following that night, I slept in my room every night. No encounters were quite as vivid as that one, but they didn't stop. One early morning, I woke up and had a quick glimpse of an old woman in a purple ball gown dress, rushing out of my closet and disappearing a few steps later into the storage unit. Another morning I woke up, and there was a young boy in overalls just standing by the unit innocently. I looked at him, went under the covers, and went back to sleep. I didn't feel like he was going to hurt me, or even knew that I was there, but I had no choice but to stay in that room. I never quite got used to the feeling, and encountered only glimpses after the camo guy, but I learnt to live with it. We moved from the house when I was 12, and I never experienced anything like it again, even though, according to my parents, it was just my crazy imagination. My parents joke with me about it now, thinking that I was just making the whole thing up. I am still a skeptic in regard to the supernatural and ghosts, but I have no explanation for what I now know I saw as a kid. My experience happened at a cemetery just outside the town of Lafayette. But before I tell you what I experienced, I'd like to give you a bit of history. I'd have to check facts, but I believe a couple of years before Oregon became a state, a woman's son was accused of witchcraft. Quite possibly a legitimate accusation, but who knows? Her son was killed under the accusation, and she was obviously very upset about it. So she reacted accordingly and was sentenced to die herself. I can't remember if she was accused of the same charges, but nonetheless, she was sentenced to die. Just before they executed her, I want to say they burned her at the stake, She cursed the town of Lafayette, saying the town would burn completely down 3 times before the curse would be lifted. And since then, believe it or not, it has burnt down completely, twice. And legend goes that she haunts the Lafayette Cemetery and will chase out and leave scratches on the back of disrespectful people that go there at dusk and at night who challenge her existence. So this is my experience. Me and some of my buddies were bored high school students on a Friday night and decided that we wanted to go ghost hunting. We were going to go to an abandoned insane asylum, but we heard some of our friends got arrested for trespassing there just the week prior. So we decided to not go there. I went online looking for haunted places nearby. I'm from Dundee, so I got online and looked around for the story of the Lafayette Cemetery. I told my buddies the story. Hesitant to the idea, they agreed that we should go check it out for ourselves. I've always believed that I was a bit more sensitive to the paranormal and could pick up on energies around me. I'm very good at reading people, whether they're good people or not. So, anyway, we get there at around 11:45. The cemetery is surrounded by farmland on all sides, but the land is very flat. The cemetery is on a hill, the only hill for some miles actually, and has the only thicket of trees for some miles. We parked off the road and got our flashlights and started to walk past the gate, up to the winding road that goes up to the top of the hill where the cemetery is. As soon as I passed the gate, I felt like I was being watched intently, like someone was staring me the hell down. As soon as I felt the stare, I instantly stopped in my tracks and thought to myself, oh my god, she's here and she knows we're here. My friends didn't believe in ghosts, so needless to say they didn't notice anything odd. And with 50 yards in front of me walking up the hill, while I stood there by myself, dumbfounded. I don't know why, but I knew this energy or spirit was a very, very angry female, and something in me knew it was the lady I had read about. I remember thinking to myself, and simultaneously telepathically speaking out to her, I'm not here with bad intentions, and I'm strictly here out of curiosity and to pay my respects. I promise I'm not here in any disrespect. I kept saying those words in my mind to her over and over, almost like a prayer, and I felt the gaze coming out of the thicket of blackberry bushes and other vegetation off the side of the path going uphill, like I could pinpoint where the energy was. So after I said my prayer a few more times, I walked further, trying to catch up with my friends, and when I took 10 steps forward, I felt this energy bum rush me. It was about 30 yards away from me, looking at me from the forest in 1 second, and the next it was right up in my face, and I started to panic because I couldn't see anything. It was a very bizarre feeling, when you can't see something but you know that it's there. The feeling was amazing, for lack of a better word, but what was weird was that I felt the energy move in its path towards me. I could sense the path, but anyway, it was right up in my face now, and I repeated my prayer. I felt it circle me slowly. I knew she was judging me. I could tell she was deciding for herself if I was full of shit or not. Thankfully I wasn't, and she knew that, because while I had felt her menacing, angry, sad, judgmental gaze circle me one more time, the feeling of her presence slowly dissipated, and I never felt or sensed anything for the rest of that night, nor the next 2 times I went there trying to sense her again. I swear on everything that this is true. Believe it or not, I don't care. This truly happened to me, and it was incredible. I'm so glad I was able to experience that on that night, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. When I was a kid, I slept on the top bunk. My twin brother slept on the bottom bunk, and my oldest brother slept on a trundle bed pull-out just in front of the bunk bed. One night, I woke up and couldn't move. I was lying on my back, and all I could do was move my eyes. I was terrified, but I couldn't scream. From the corner of my eye, I looked out through the open door into the dark night, to where my father slept down the hall. I hoped I could see him, or tell him somehow, but all I could see was blackness and shadows, and then the shadows were walking. The black of dark took the form of a man, 6 foot tall, as featureless as any shadow on a sunny day. It was pure black, dark, abysmal. The shadows were walking into the room, and I could not scream. I watched him as he stepped from the floor onto my oldest brother, asleep on the trundle bed, but he didn't even wake nor move. The shadows had no weight and made no sound. I watched him grab the bar of the top bunk for leverage and step onto my twin brother's bed. He didn't wake up either, and I was now at eye level with the shadows walking. Gracefully and silently, he pulled himself to the top bunk, where he straddled his legs on either side of my mortified, stiff body. He sat there for a moment, as though staring at me. Then he placed his hands on my chest and pushed down hard and violently, angrily even, against my ribs. Just one horrible, aggravated force all at once. I blacked out from the pain and woke up the next morning still very much in pain all over my chest, but there were no bruises. I didn't tell anyone. I knew they wouldn't believe me. I don't believe me. My lungs strained to breathe that week, and it eventually went away, and the shadows have stayed in the corners. I'm a rational, logical man. I dismiss ghost stories out of hand and chalk them up to superstition or hallucinations brought on by sleep paralysis. But what I felt and saw that night, I can never forget what it was to see the shadows walking. While visiting England as a tourist, I ran across 2 tombstones for men named James Dixon, as that's my name. I was not looking for anyone named Dixon. I wasn't knowingly visiting places where any of my relatives had lived. This was pure coincidence. One of them was inside the town of Kirkby, Lonsdale, in Cumbria. I was staying there for a week because some relatives of mine had arranged a house swap. It happened that the shortest path between the house and the town centre involved a shortcut through the churchyard. Once I just looked up, and it was there. The same week we went on a bus trip to the Lake District, which was a short distance away. In one of the villages we passed through, I believe Grasmere, I ran across the other one. It happened that this James Dixon had been a servant of the poet William Wordsworth. The inscription on the tomb said that it had been paid for by the Wordsworth family. It was in the same cemetery as Wordsworth's own grave. I don't regard these as particularly creepy, but it was an amazing coincidence. I'm in my room, sitting in front of my computer, working late at night as usual. I have to go pee, so I head out the door. I'm staying with family for a few weeks, so I try to be super quiet to avoid waking anyone up. To get to the bathroom, I have to go around a sort of left-hand U-turn. I've stayed in this house for a month or so, every year for as long as I've been alive, and I've done a lot of midnight pees, so I know the way by heart. I go out the door, take a few steps, turn left, few steps, left turn, down the hall and into the bathroom. I turn the light on in the bathroom, do my business, turn the lights off, and start making my way back towards my room. I don't want to turn on the hall light at this point, again, to avoid disturbing family, so I'm basically blind. I feel my way down the hallway, turn right, few steps, turn right, and suddenly, holy crap, I swear I saw a shadow or something move. I stop dead and listen, because I'm still totally blind. Nothing. So I take another few steps and swear to God I saw a shadowy figure move towards me, directly in front of me, out of the solid wood door to my room. I stopped, again, and feel panic start to set in. This is the creepiest thing I've ever experienced, since childhood nightmares, and I used to have some pretty messed up ones, like that my dad was trying to kill me. I'm not imagining things. I definitely saw a shadowy thing move towards me in the dark. I take one more step towards my room, close enough to the door handle to grab it, and the shadowy, creepy as hell moving thing comes towards me again. It's getting bigger this time, and now it's right in front of my face, inches away, but I can't quite focus on it. I start to freak out. I actually consider calling for help. Sleeping family be damned. And that's when my nose bumps into the mirror that hangs on the wall next to my door at a 90-degree angle. Turns out I got really disoriented and never made my second right-hand turn. This story is not really about me, but about my younger sister and my relationship with her. We are very close, and she means the world to me. I have 2 younger twin brothers, but I'm not as close with them as I am with her. Anyway, before I begin my story, I have to provide some context about our lives. We grew up in a very Christian household. No, not the church every Sunday, and no cursing kind of Christians. I mean the go to church twice a week, a cross in every room, and daily prayer kind of Christian household. Needless to say, religion was a big thing in our family. I grew up around, mostly, my family, and didn't really have too many friends growing up, because my family preferred me hanging around with people who were in our religion. I'm not going to say which religion we are, because not everyone is like my family in our religion. I don't like putting people in bubbles like my family had me believe. Anyway, the kids we did get to hang around with were kids of my own religion, and luckily we got to go to school with them, and also normal kids. A lot of kids in my church did go to public school because it was the closest, and there wasn't a school directly for my religion in our county at the time. So my sister and I were very sheltered and awkward kids. We weren't allowed to do many after-school activities, and the ones we could do were more about academics like math club and chess club, and of course, Kids for Christ. Like I said before, me and my sister were rarely allowed to hang out with kids outside our religion without supervision. But when we did hang around other kids of our faith, we made the most of it, especially since some of those kids were actually doing things against our religion, like doing drugs, sleeping with other kids in the church, cursing, and I can tell you many stories about me and my sister getting high and other cool stuff, but that's for another time. In fact, in the beginning, I even tattled on a few of them when I was in middle school, because it was drilled into me that they were going to hell if I did not, and so was I for keeping it a secret. Yeah, I had a lot of that stuff drilled into me. So most of what me and my sister learnt about the world outside our church was either from those cool kids or from Reddit and the internet. We had a family computer, and it had to be in the living room. Me and my sister had to use it in public to make sure we weren't using it for anything dubious. Sometimes me and my sister would go out to the living room at 2 a.m. and just go on websites that we weren't allowed to be on, like Reddit, Facebook, or watch funny videos. We didn't even have smartphones, because they were kind of just starting to pick up, and we weren't allowed to have them. So that's why we would do that. Sometimes we'd get caught from laughing out loud and get lectured by our father, but those are still some of my favorite memories with my sister. Enough backstory though, on to what happened. As I said before, me and my sister were both extremely close. We could tell each other anything, which is why it warmed and broke my heart when she came out to me as gay at age 17. I feel guilty because I said she was just confused, but I knew I was wrong. I hugged her and cried with her because I could only imagine the pressure and guilt and pain she was going through. Of course, we never told our family and kept it a secret. Being gay is something that is not accepted in our religion, so my sister wanted to get away from our family to some place where she could just be herself. When she graduated high school a year before I did, she begged my parents to go to a university she wanted. My parents told us that after high school we could either go to a community college or a university that was run by people of our religion, like a Catholic school or something. However, with enough convincing that we were good kids with Christ in our hearts, my parents let her go to the university she wanted, under the strict rules which I will get to later. I went to community college to get my general eds done, and then my parents let me do the same as my sister. I decided to go to a school in New York City called Columbia University, and my sister decided to go to a university called UCLA, which was a university in Los Angeles, California. I guess those extracurricular activities paid off. Although me and my sister were on opposite sides of the country, we were still able to communicate, because our parents let us have our own computers and Samsung Galaxy S4s, with the exception of being forced to download the app Life 360. If you don't know what it is, it's an app that allows your family members to see where you are based on the GPS in your phone. So we had to be careful where we went, or at least leave our phones at home in our dorms when we went out and partied at night. My sister and I would constantly talk about college life and how amazing it was to be away from the strict household. We could be free and do whatever we wanted. On Skype, she gave all the details about her life and told me things like about how extremely gay-friendly California was, and she even had a girlfriend now, and told me how open she can be about her sexuality. Unfortunately, she may have been a little too open. Let me explain. At home, we were constantly told to suppress sexual urges, so my sister just let hers all out while she was at college. She told me stories on Skype about how she was polyamorous, so she could date more than one person at once and had multiple girlfriends. I didn't get it, but she said she would sometimes want to experiment with toys, other gays, and straight couples, and would even sometimes bring 1 to 3 women, including her girlfriend of the time, back to the fraternity house and let all their urges run wild. I wasn't a fan of listening to those stories and thought she was making a lot of those stories up. But of course, it's my sister. I did it anyway because I told her she could tell me anything. However, one experience is the one I'm telling you about now. One morning, I get a call at 2 a.m. and had to walk out into the hall because I didn't want to wake up my roommates. It was my sister. She was crying hysterically, and I could barely make out her words through her sobbing. "Just calm down. Tell me what's wrong." She responded that she was being stalked and harassed and didn't know what to do, nor who else to call. I told her to call the police. She told me that she couldn't, and I was confused and asked her to tell me what was going on. Apparently, the story goes like this. One day at university, my sister met this girl, April, and asked April if she wanted to be part of her polyamorous thing, or whatever it was. Apparently, they hit it off really well and had a really good connection. About a week or 2 into their relationship, my sister asked April if she wanted to come back to her dorm to watch Netflix and hang out. They did, but my sister's other girlfriend stopped by to pick up something she left at her dorm. My sister gave her a kiss goodbye, and when April saw this, she was kind of mad. She was upset because she thought she shouldn't do that when they're in the same room, or some other bullshit like that. And apparently they got into a fight. They made up and eventually got back together. Then my sister started noticing suspicious things about April for the past few months. April would constantly call and text her non-stop, get jealous when she was with another woman, and stuff like that. At one time, my sister received 48 texts from April while she was in class, and couldn't answer because she was taking a test. "Where are you? Why aren't you answering? You better not be with another woman. Why don't you love me?" Crazy texts like that. That was the final straw for my sister, and she broke it off with April, who didn't take it well. My sister told me about April in the past, but I just thought nothing of it. Just people being crazy, I guess, right? However, my sister started seeing April everywhere she went. She saw her when she was walking to class, at the front of her dorm when she got out, in the cafeteria, messages on social media. It was insane. My sister threatened to call campus security on April, and that did seem to scare her off for a while, but that would only last so long. Fast forward to fall semester of 2015, and my sister starts to hear from April again. Only this time, things got worse. April would go around to women my sister was supposedly dating and tell them that she was my sister's fiancé or girlfriend, or even she had an STD and they should stay away from her or else. My sister even started receiving threats from April via social media accounts. I swear this girl was insane. My sister was terrified, to say the least. She called campus security and just asked her to watch out, that she doesn't try and come into the same dorm building and to not make a big deal about it, and I'll explain why in a second. One night, my sister and her roommate come back into their dorms, and my sister noticed the door was open. They were sure that they had locked it. They came back, and the room looked fine, but there was a note on my sister's bed. What it said still scares both of us to this day. Like a cliché horror movie, the note read, "If I can't have you in my life, no one can. Never go near another woman, or else I know where you live." My sister just started crying and showed her roommates the letter. They were in utter shock, and also, through her tears, she noticed one thing was missing. Her purse was gone. Her purse had a lot of important stuff in it. Her wallet, which had her license, debit cards, some dead gift cards, and other unimportant stuff. But luckily her phone and computer were still there charging under the bed. And after that, she immediately called me. Now I know what you're thinking. Why didn't she call campus security or the police? Well, here's the reason. Usually when situations occur on college campuses and the police have to get involved, guess who else might possibly receive a call? That's right, our parents. And if they found out about April and my sister, there's a good chance my sister would have worse to worry about at home. I've been told by people that technically the school or police can't call your parents without your permission, but my sister was too afraid to take the risk. That would be a hard thing to keep secret. The only thing we could do right now would be to cancel the debit cards and ask for new ones from the bank. Luckily, April didn't use them, because all the money was still there in her account. That was the only thing we had to explain to our parents. She just said that she may have accidentally left her wallet at Starbucks or something, and they were even worried just about that. As for her driver's license, I don't know what to do besides look up or Google how to get a new one, but she did end up getting a newer one later. So for the next few months, my sister was on constant lookout, but luckily she didn't hear from April in a while. We weren't sure if it was just because maybe she lost interest, or maybe because she was planning something, but we didn't care. That didn't mean my sister was still nervous. My sister always double-checks the area she was in, and made sure to be aware of her surroundings. She even went to the official college safe spot, and yes, those exist. Luckily, she didn't turn into one of the social justice warriors I keep hearing about. Anyway, she did hear from April a couple of times, but they were just messages from fake profiles on Facebook. She couldn't prove that they were her, but we knew they were. Who else would those messages be from? So luckily my sister never heard from her for a while. However, that wouldn't last too long. Like I said before, our parents had a tracking app on our phone, and often our parents would just call us to see how we were doing, or why we were somewhere. So a lot of the time we just left our phones at our dorm. My sister told me through Skype that she heard from April again, when she brought a girl back from a party to her dorm to fool around. After they were done, she noticed she received a text from a random number about an hour ago. It read, "Bring another whore back to your dorm? I knew you were a slut." She said she was terrified. I told her April was probably just at the party because a lot of people were there, but make sure to still be on the lookout. A day or two later, I'm laying in bed watching my favorite movie with my girlfriend at the time, when I get a call from a blocked number. I knew I shouldn't have answered it, but I did anyway. I answered, "Hello?" And in a low voice I heard, "Hi. I bet you didn't know your sister was a little whore, right?" "Excuse me?" I say, and the person on the phone replied, "Yeah, a worthless little whore," and then just hung up. Needless to say, I was pissed off and confused, and my girlfriend could see it. She asked what was wrong, and I told her. I had to walk out and call my sister. I knew it was April, and I don't know how she got my number, but she did. I called her and told her not to panic. I told her to please be careful and to always carry mace or a stun gun or something, because we were stuck and we didn't know what else to do. Seeing her back home during Thanksgiving was such a relief, but I could see the effects that April and college stress had on her. The stress of finals were already killing us, and now we had this to worry about? Luckily, April didn't call my sister or I again for the last month, and things were quiet. Fast forward to December and all of our finals were done. We were both back at home with our parents and brothers, and glad to be home. We did, however, miss the freedom that we had at college. Whenever we came home from college, it went from freedom to go and do what you want to only using the computer in the living room and being home by 10 p.m. We spent the last few days either talking, going to church, relaxing, or texting our friends. And yes, we got to keep the phones. Christmas came, and I wish I could say it was a relaxing one, but it wasn't. First came church, then of course volunteering at the soup kitchen, which is something I actually like about my church, and then dinner with family. It was a lot, but in the end my family brought us new clothes and about $500 in cash and gift cards, so I'd say it was a good Christmas. Everything was peaceful, or so I thought. Fast forward a week or two. It was a cold Wednesday morning and my father was awake. He usually wakes up early because he enjoys drinking coffee in peace while watching TV or reading literature our church hands out. I was just starting to wake up when he calls me and my siblings downstairs in a not good tone of voice. We sat down on the couch and my mum was there as well. They looked furious and we were all a little nervous and confused. What was going on? My father was looking through the mail and found a letter with a return address he didn't recognize and under the name Jane Doe. When he showed us what was inside, I couldn't believe what I saw. In his hand were printed out pictures of my sister from her private Facebook account. They were pictures of my sister either partying or kissing with every girl my sister was dating within that 2-year period. My sister's face turned as white as a ghost, and me and her must have shat bricks when he showed us. My father stared at my sister and said in the sternest tone possible, "What are these?" Before any of us could get a word out, he yelled it again. I was dumbfounded and terrified. My sister began to break out into tears. I was just sitting there and wondered, how the hell? And then I remembered. April had my sister's original driving license when she stole her purse. April must have copied pictures from my sister's Facebook account and sent them home. But I didn't understand how the hell she could have gotten those photos because her Facebook was private. April and her were friends for about a month, but she unfriended her and some photos were from after she blocked her. I didn't know how, but it didn't matter. What made it worse was on the back of the photos it read, "I know where you live." All I could remember was my father screaming, and my sister and mother were crying, and me and my brothers were just sitting there in shock. My sister confessed everything about her and April, and my parents were furious to say the least. My father walked up to me and my brothers and asked, "Did any of you know about this?" My 2 brothers legitimately didn't, and they answered no. My father walked up to me and asked if I knew, and like a dog, with the tail in between his legs, I responded, "No, I didn't." He looked me dead in the eyes and said, "People who keep other sins a secret and lie about it burn in hellfire. So I'm going to ask you one last time, did you know?" Once again I responded, "No, I didn't, Dad." I could see my sister just in shock through her tears that I didn't defend her. I still see her shocked face in my nightmares. How could I not stand up for my baby sister, my best friend, my flesh and blood, when she needed it the most? In the end, my father gave her an ultimatum. Either my sister went to conversion therapy, which, yes, is still a thing in my state, or she leaves the house. Also, there's no way she was going to be allowed back into UCLA. My sister kept saying that she didn't need therapy, and begged our parents to accept her for who she was, but that didn't happen. In the end, my father kicked her out of the house, and me and my brothers were furious with them. When confronting my parents and yelling how could they do this, my mother and father kept justifying their actions by saying she chose to sin against God, and it put our family in danger. And if you're wondering why my parents didn't call the police, well, here's why. A lot of our neighbors and people in our community went to the same church. If one neighbor saw police cars at our house, someone would get suspicious, and someone would find out what happened. Word would spread through my church like wildfire, and my parents would be looked at differently and with contempt by everyone at church. My parents cared more about their reputation in our church than the safety and security of their own daughter. I never looked at my parents in the same way again. Luckily, a distant friend who left our church was able to take her in. Although the spring semester of UCLA was already paid for, there was no way for her to get there or support herself while there, so she never got to go back. My parents told me to cut off communication with her, but there was no way that was ever going to happen. They threatened to either not let me go back to school or kick me out, but I was able to find my way around them. My sister told me that she forgave me for not standing up for her because she understands I was scared and it wasn't my fault. She said she kept blaming herself, but I kept telling her that there's nothing wrong with her. My parents never should have done what they did. I'm currently still with my parents and have another year until I graduate with my electrical engineering degree. My sister is still currently living with my friend, but she's got a job and a girlfriend, and they're a beautiful couple. When I move out, you're damn right I'm not going back to church. Not because I hate our church, but because I know it will make my parents angry, and they can't threaten me then. So to my sister, if you're listening to this, please know I love you, and I will always be there for you. Luckily, we never heard from April again. And if you're hearing this, April, I hope you understand that you ruined the life of an amazing young woman who was stuck in the closet. And rather than sympathize with someone on your own side, you made the life of a closeted gay person harder. So April, I hope you rot in hell for what you did to my family. My father used to work at an airbase. This occurred when I was 6, in the 1st grade. We still lived in base housing at the time. My school bus couldn't drop me off on base at my bus stop, as I was the only kid on board who needed to go on base. I was kicked out of the school for Air Force kids for bad behavior, and this was post 9/11. They would drop me off at the gate, and I would walk to my dad's office, since it wasn't very far and maybe a few blocks away. If you can imagine a little schoolgirl with a Kim Possible bag, French braids, and her favorite stuffed wolf in her arms, that's what I looked like the day this happened. My father had taught me to always stay along the main road when I walked to his office, because then everyone who was driving around would see me. The main road ran straight through the base, passing by the housing, dorms, museums, and the like. But it also passed by the old cemetery, left over from the days that the base was an army fort. The gates were always locked, but the inside was, and still is, well kept, all things considered. Green grass, tall oak trees, fresh flowers on holidays, and wreaths on each headstone every year. There are 60 to 70 headstones there, and the last person buried there was in 1910. I passed by every day, but today was different. A side gate was open. Being a kid, I debated whether or not to take this opportunity to cut through the cemetery to get to my dad's office, or to just go around like normal. I chose to walk through. It was abnormally quiet there. In spring, there's always a lot of meadowlarks about, making noise, but it was quiet in the cemetery, save for the sound of passing cars and that wonderful prairie wind ripping through. The shade was nice, so I kept going, taking the chance to practice reading the names and numbers in my head. Out of the corner of the eye, I saw movement, like a black blob. Looking towards it, I could see a woman in a long black dress and veil, kneeling in front of a headstone. In the silence, I could make out the sound of sad prayers and light sobs. So I walked over and stood behind her. "Why are you crying?" I asked. The woman turned to look at me. I couldn't see her eyes behind the veil, but she had tears stained across her cheeks. I was overwhelmed with sadness by just looking at her. "Why are you crying?" I asked again. She said that someone that she loved was gone, and that she cries day and night. "I'm sorry," I thought for a second. "Do you want to hold my Wolfie? He makes me feel better when I'm really sad and when Papa's away. He growls when you squeeze his tummy." Remember, I was 6. And as I said that, I gave Wolfie a hard squeeze, making him growl. She nodded and gently took him from me and gave him a squeeze back. For a brief second, I thought she smiled. She handed him back to me. "Thank you. You should run home before your father begins to worry." She said that as I turned to leave. When I turned back around to ask her how she knew my papa, she was gone. I'd never run so hard in my life. To this day, I wonder if in fact I met the widow in black that security talks about. I'm in the don't believe in ghosts category of people, but I have an experience that I just simply can't explain, and I have tried for over a decade. I had been homeless for a while, having fled an abusive home when I was 17. My friend had an abandoned trailer, so I started sleeping in there. At first, I didn't have money to turn on the utilities, so I slept there and just turned them on one by one. It's significant to the story because it meant that there were no creaky pipes and no hum of electricity. Almost right away, I started hearing strange noises, what sounded like footsteps down the hall and in the kitchen, and cabinet doors opening and closing. At night, when I would leave for work, which would be the 3rd shift, I would pull on the door and crank the key. By the time I got out to the car, I would hear a click, and the lock would be undone. Figuring I was retarded at locking the deadbolt, but it spooked me, and I would just take off every time. About a week goes by, and I get paid at work, so I begin turning on utilities. I'm a girl, so naturally water and the telephone have to come first. Well, one night, I'm on the phone with the girl that inherited the trailer, and I hear the footsteps again. I had stopped talking and she asked what was wrong, and I joked that the trailer was haunted. And I'll never forget her words in response to this. "Don't worry, she is friendly." She proceeded to tell me about an old lady that died there. I flipped the hell out, and she insisted that she was safe. Somehow I convinced my friend and her 2-year-old daughter to move in with me, and things just got weirder. The little girl would play with something unseen in the kitchen. The cat would purr and play with something in the kitchen. If she was screaming and crying in her room, one of us would get up to check on her to find her giggling and talking to someone. When we were drinking or smoking pot, things started acting up. The cabinets would open, things would fall out of them, and we would be very creeped out. The final straw was one night when I was with some dude in the living room. There was a back door that was attached to the living room. We opened it once but never used it because we didn't have a key for it. Right in the middle of us doing it, it swings open so hard that it slams into the side of the trailer. I thought for sure it was a tornado or something. I wrapped the sheet around myself and go to close the door, as it was completely still outside. That and the deadbolt were from what scared me the most. In order to lock the front door, you had to pull the door shut, or push from the inside, and it took significant effort to turn the key to deadbolt it. Why did it keep propping open? The cabinets? Well, I kept figuring maybe the trailer was tilted or something, but they had the little magnets that kept them from closing. So, I just don't know. This happened many years ago. I was newly single and looking for a way to meet new people. So I thought I would try my luck at online dating. I created a profile and went about speaking to men online. I even met a few for coffee or lunch. My initial nervousness at the prospect of meeting strangers online for possible romance was calmed somewhat, as I learnt that there were a lot of nice guys out there just looking for companionship like I was, and I became optimistic. In the past, I had a habit of dating men that were non-commitment types. I realized I was ready to try and find someone that wanted something more serious. I made a mistake though, because in formulating this goal, I largely blamed myself for my failed past relationships, reasoning that perhaps I had somehow unconsciously chosen a partner who was not ready for commitment. I decided I should try to be more open to nice, sincere men who seemed ready for the kind of relationship that I was ready for. In doing so, however, I ended up ignoring the gut instincts that I had always followed, and this came back to bite me. Enter Mark. Mark worked in a bank and was divorced with one child. He was fairly good-looking, articulate, and we shared many interests. We began chatting online, and this progressed to phone calls after a few days, and finally, the idea arose to meet for coffee. Looking back now, I note he seemed in a hurry to meet me right from the get-go, despite me saying I preferred to speak for a while initially. We decided on a possible date, general location within my neighborhood, and general time, but it was not confirmed. I recall at the time I was pretty busy, and as we began to get closer to the date, I felt like I was going to be too busy to meet him. In the days leading up, without a location or exact time set, I didn't get back to him because I ended up getting tied up with other things and didn't know when I would be free. I hadn't spoken to him in several days by this point, and this is where the first red flag occurred. And in retrospect, I should have passed altogether with our meeting. But as I said, I was trying out this new attitude of being more open and accepting of nice men. On the date that we discussed meeting, I was out somewhere when my phone rang. I noticed that it was Mark. I picked up and he said in a warm tone, "Hello, I'm in your neighborhood. I know we said we were going to meet today, but where would you like to meet? Because I'm here now and waiting." I found this alarming, because not only had I never gotten back to him with a time or location, I knew for a fact he lived 2 cities away, and it would have taken a long time for him to drive down here on the loose plan of a meeting that was never confirmed. But again, I told myself, hey, this guy really wants to meet you. He's sincere. Enjoy this for a change. So against my gut instinct, I told him I would meet him on a different day, and agreed on an actual date and time. The date went surprisingly well. He was just as good looking in real life. We had a good conversation and he was very nice, and we started seeing each other. He was all about romantic gestures, paying attention to me, calling me, and generally just being kind and sweet every day. He always seemed to want to spend time with me, and I told myself that this was what I had been missing for a long time. I did my best to try and appreciate the gestures and attention as something positive, even though I wasn't really used to it, and it did feel a little strange, because I didn't know him very well, and he would do things like show up unannounced with flowers to my work, only after a short amount of time seeing each other. He was also very touchy-feely, something I wasn't used to or fond of. I was uncomfortable with his constant kissing and touching, rubbing of my arm, and just generally suffocating me even when we were in public. I recall one time telling him that I was going to go downtown with a group of my girlfriends for a birthday celebration, and he insisted that we should go out for a drink alone beforehand. I said it wasn't really necessary, because I would have an hour or so to spend prior to going out with my friends. The drive for him was about an hour or more, and I felt like this is an extreme amount of trouble to go to see me for a short amount of time. But he insisted that even an hour with me would be worth it. When he arrived, I met him at a local pub. We had a drink, and then he laughed and joked that he should just come downtown with me and my girlfriends. I told him no, that was weird. He wasn't invited, and that wasn't what we discussed. He went home, dejected, and that was really the first time I felt a little bit annoyed with him. Things went on though, as I spent the night at his house after about 3 weeks. I told him that I had plans the next day, and that I would have to get going at around 10 a.m. However, when I went to leave the next morning, he got very distressed and kept insisting that I should stay because it was a beautiful day. And it was a real shame that I was leaving, because there are so many wonderful things we should do together. That day, instead of me leaving to partake in the plans I had with my family. I should also mention that for the past week or so, he'd been insisting that he loved me, and would tell me multiple times a day. I didn't reciprocate. When I finally went to get out of the front door, he basically wrapped around me in the doorway and kissed me all over, hugging me, and repeated that he loved me, that I was everything he wanted in his life as a woman. I got really grossed out in the way he was behaving and left, very irritated, and didn't say anything, as I really did need to get going. I decided even before I was out his driveway that I was never going to see him again. Over the next day or two, I thought about how I would let him down and talked it over with my close friends. I kicked myself too for deliberately ignoring my gut. During this time, I responded to his relentless phone calls with polite texts to stall him until I was ready to speak with him. Finally, I settled on what I felt was a compassionate but firm approach to letting him down. I spoke to him on the phone and explained that I had come to the conclusion that I was not at a point in my life where I wanted a relationship whatsoever with anyone, including him. Lie. He kept trying to question what he had gotten wrong, what he misunderstood, but I kept repeating that he did nothing wrong. I simply didn't want to date. I went with this approach out of a complete lack of interest in doing anything to enlighten him on what a turn-off his behavior was. I had already enough responsibility in my life and had no desire to add a revoltingly pathetic man-child. Since we'd only been seeing each other for less than a month, I thought it would be the end of it. But I was wrong. I woke up the following day to find a long, desperate email in my inbox. He basically said he was mentally ill, and that he was taking an antidepressant that he blamed for his clingy behavior, although I had not complained to him about his behavior at all. He ended by saying the word, "Throw out this medication, and therefore we should date again." The tone of the whole letter was panicked, selfish, and needy. He also repeated, "You are everything I want," but I did not once address the desires or feelings I had expressed for myself in our talk. I ignored it. Then the onslaught began. Over the week or so, he blew up my work phone, cell phone, and email with non-stop begging to reconsider his wants, of course, not mine. I became increasingly annoyed at how entitled he felt to dismiss everything I said that I wanted, and to blatantly intrude in my life with such a relentless stream of calls and emails. At work, for example, he called my desk phone literally 34 times in 3 hours. My co-workers were flabbergasted and even offered to answer and scream in his ear. I can't understand why he thought that behavior would somehow make someone like him. It obviously did the opposite. One of his texts to me was in regard to a pair of cheap, plastic, scratched sunglasses that he had left in my car. He claimed that they were very expensive, and that they belonged to his mother, and that she would be very upset if they weren't returned. Whatever, I thought. So I drove directly to his house and dumped them in his mailbox. I finally texted him back just after to let him know that they were in there, and to not contact me again, so that hopefully he wouldn't formulate any more asinine excuses to see or talk to me. Of course, this didn't stop him. The onslaught continued several more days until he next claimed I'd left something small, a scarf or something, at his house, and that he needed to return it to me and would come to my work. I sent him another text. "I told you to stop harassing me. If you contact me again, I'm calling the cops, and will show them the onslaught of emails, voicemails, and texts you've been sending." This worked. Well, sort of. I continued to get the occasional Facebook messages from him for a few years, even though we weren't friends, and I never replied to a single one. In the last one, he told me that he had spotted me out in public somewhere. I was with my giant husband, thank God, and he wrote how good I looked, and added that he hoped still we could be friends again one day. No thanks, Mark. I don't want to be your friend, but thanks for the lesson learned. Never ignore your instincts. This is a true story that happened on May 15th, 2006, in a small Illinois town where I grew up. I've always believed in ghosts ever since I was a little girl, because for the first 10 years of my life, my family and I have lived in an old spooky house where many strange things happened that were unexplainable. I never actually saw anything in the house, but on the evening of May 15th, 2006, I encountered a full-body apparition. There's an old cemetery that I used to go to, just to walk around and look at the headstones. It's a very quiet, peaceful place. And after having a stressful day, I liked to go there for a bit to relax. I also took my 2 children there when they were younger, because there were gophers that dug holes in the ground, and the kids liked to see them every once in a while. We always felt comfortable there, never afraid. We always went in the daytime and never at night. Not that I was afraid or anything. It just seemed like the daytime was when we went there. Anyway, when I went there to walk around, I usually went by myself. My 2 kids were older at this point, so they had other things to do and lost interest in going. I've always loved this old cemetery, so I continued going there from time to time. I always went in the afternoon, around 2 to 3 p.m. I would walk through it several times and then just head home. On this day, the incident happened. I was running late that day and didn't get to the cemetery until around 4:30. I'd had a stressful day and needed to walk and a little bit of alone time. Even though it was a later time than when I usually went, and would be getting dark soon, it didn't matter. I had been in there many times before, and nothing had ever happened to me, so I didn't give it a second thought. I always parked my car at the very back, and would walk through several times until I got tired. Let me explain something to you. There is only one way out of this cemetery, and that's through the front. This place is pretty big and surrounded by a very high fence with barbed wire on the top, and there's no way over it. The very back has a smaller fence, but there's a sharp drop-off that goes into a riverbed, so no one could leave that way. On this particular day, I parked in the back as usual and left my vehicle. I had a habit of checking my surroundings before I exited, like looking to see if anyone else were there. I didn't want to get trapped in by some weirdo. I looked around and saw no one, and began my walk. I walked through several times and had stopped to look at a few headstones. After about an hour and a half or so, I stopped at my car to rest. I noticed twilight coming on and debated going home. I thought I'd walk through one more time before heading back. I looked around, no one was there, and began walking again. I was about 2 blocks from my car when I heard what sounded like a male voice yelling, "Hey!" from behind me. I froze because I knew it was impossible for someone to be behind me, in the back of the cemetery, so quickly, without me seeing them. I had just been back there by my car several minutes before. Nobody was there. I turned around and saw what appeared to be a tall, thin man, dressed in a dark blue uniform. It was getting kind of dark back then, and I could still see where he was. When he looked at me, he waved his hand and started walking very fast, eager to catch up. I was afraid. I honestly thought this was some crazy person, and something told me to run, so I did. I ran to my car as fast as I could, got in, and started it up there and then. I decided to drive through to see who the weirdo was, but nobody was there at all. I drove through the entire place twice and didn't see a single soul. I knew that that was no person I saw, but a phantom. I didn't realize this was the case when I saw him. He wasn't transparent or anything like that. He didn't float above the ground, disappear in front of me, or anything. I thought he was just a regular guy. I then knew it was really a ghost when I couldn't find him, as there's no way he could have left that place. It's just impossible. When I saw him, he was in the very back of the cemetery, not too far from where my car was parked. It didn't take me long to get back there, because I doubled back and took a shortcut in between the headstones. I drove through right away, and should have seen him walking on the path still, but he was nowhere. I'd never forgotten this incident and have never been back to the cemetery. Whether people believe me or not, I don't mind. It happened, and that's all that matters. And if I were you, I'd seriously think about going into a cemetery alone at night. 11 years ago, before my wife and I got married, we were trying to save a bit of money before the wedding, and so were living with my mum. My wife was working at the hospital in the city next to the beach. She worked 12-hour shifts, and I worked 10-hour shifts. On my days off, if she had to work, I would take her and pick her up, because the hospital wasn't in the best part of the city, and staff had to ride a trolley to and from the parking lot to the hospital. So, one evening we get home. My aunt and uncle had come in from out of town to visit. My wife smoked at the time, and so did my uncle and aunt. We're all sitting outside with them talking, when suddenly my wife goes quiet, staring towards the end of the driveway. She slowly takes her cigarette, which she just lit, and snuffs it out, looks at me and goes, "I've had enough. I'm going inside." She stands up and goes in without another word. I stood up and asked her what was wrong, but she just continued without looking back. What she didn't know at the time is that I already knew what it was. Because when I looked down the driveway, standing there was the figure of a woman that I had seen many times before, just staring at us. She had mid-length curly brown hair, wearing a white nightgown with a blue robe. She always seemed to come when new people were there. From time to time, she would come into our room and just stare at us, but my wife had never seen her. I go inside and ask my wife to come back out, and at first she refused to, but eventually gave in and came back out. I had never mentioned this apparition to her, so I was curious what she saw, so I started asking her to tell me. At first, she said that she was tired and wanted to go inside, but I saw her too, so I wanted to verify if we had seen the same thing. Finally, I just bluntly said, "Honey, what did it look like?" She looks at me and her face goes white all over again. And she said, "If you want to look for yourself, she's by the truck." Shivers went up my spine, but I had to stay calm. I asked her to describe her to me. Her voice was shaky, but she said brown curly hair, white gown, and blue robes. I had to keep myself from jumping out of my skin. It was the exact same figure that I had seen multiple times. I told her it's okay, and that I see her from time to time as well, and that she means no harm. My wife looks at me and said I don't care if she does or doesn't. We're leaving here as soon as we can, because I don't want to see her again. From that day, we left a few months after, and never saw her again. I like to think that maybe she was just protecting my mum, who still lives there with my sister and her family to this day. She wasn't the only ghost at the house, as my sister and her family have witnessed things, but they haven't seen the brown-haired lady in quite some time. This all started on an online game called League of Legends. Back in the time I used to play alone, so it was rare to see someone talking my native tongue, which was surprising when I saw two players in the in-game chat speaking back and forth in the language, and I got excited and replied as well. That's when I met this guy. We added each other on social media and quickly became friends. We also realized we lived on the same place but different islands. On a few days of getting to know him, I noticed that he was a guy who suffered from depression. So as a friend, I tried to help him overcome it, but that just made him fall in love with me. Back at the time, I was 18 and he was 2 years older than me, and he decided to move to my island to continue his studies here. I honestly got so happy to meet him in person, and a few months after he moved here, and after some dates, we began a relationship. That was a big mistake. He was very jealous and wouldn't let me be with my friends or even my family. Sometimes my parents would pick him up and bring him to my house so he wouldn't be alone, and he refused to talk to them because he was mad that I was giving them too much attention. Things started to escalate when he called me at night screaming on my phone, saying he was going to commit suicide if I didn't give him all of my attention or sleep with him. So I started experiencing anxiety every night, with fear of his calls, and never had the opportunity to end our relationship because I didn't want to be the cause of his suicide. One day I stayed home, afraid again of all of the abuse that I was suffering from his hand. It was on that day he sent me a Facebook picture of his shirt full of blood, and I almost dropped my phone. I spammed him with messages and missed calls trying to see if he was okay. I almost called an ambulance, afraid he was hurt or worse. And hours later he replied, saying nothing was going on, and that he got hurt during dinner and couldn't reply sooner. I got angry, demanding to know how he got the injury. He refused to tell me if I didn't call him first, so I did. And what he told me still gives me shivers. He told me that the bloody pictures weren't from an accident. He had purposefully cut himself so that he could get pleasure with my panic and attention towards him. When I heard this, I switched off my phone, got a panic attack, and my parents rushed to my bedroom, and I told them what was going on. Before we all blocked him on social media, I told him to never contact me again and that our relationship was over. The next day, I received several phone calls and threats from his mother and family, and I decided to wake up earlier the day after to go to school since he knew my schedules. On the way there, I called a friend to let her know what happened and to give me company until I went to class. We were talking in the school cafeteria, full of people. When class started, most of the students were making their way there. That's when my friend, with silent wide eyes, looked at me. I looked back and jumped. It was my ex. He had the most dead eyes I'd ever seen in my life. When I saw that he had something in his pockets, I bolted. I'd never run so fast in my life. I quickly got up and looked at the bathroom stall. When the maintenance lady saw me running, she came after me and asked me what was going on. I told her there was a man in school that wasn't a student and that he was after me and could be armed. She quickly got me locked up in a classroom and called the police. They came but never found him, and they took me to the station to write a report. This was a year ago, and they never found him. I guess he went back to his other island when he saw trouble coming, and I hope we never meet again. Just about an hour ago, I was biking with a friend north on Congress Avenue towards downtown Austin, Texas. We were both about to start our shift for a food delivery app. We were engaged in a lively discussion as we approached the four-way intersection of Riverside and Congress, generally a dangerous place for cyclists. I was telling my friend about how I get stressed and feel bad about a lot of meaningless things while we waited for the red light to change. We were side by side in the bike lane, with not too much space between us. Suddenly, a third cyclist rode up and squeezed between us, very close, intimate even, a bit too much for a stranger. He was tall and pale with dark brown hair. He had on a beanie and a Coke bottle, glasses and a flannel, jeans and black Converse. His bike was old-fashioned, with wide silver handlebars, and he could have walked out of a 60s-era movie about reefer's madness, or just be your everyday hipster with no respect for personal space. He says, as if he's been in our conversation the whole time, "Don't worry, don't stress, try to be kind to everyone." His face was serene, and had blue eyes staring into the distance over the bridge towards the capital. Just then, the lights turned green. I looked at the third cyclist, but he didn't budge, so I took off. I'd only gone a few feet when I instinctively looked to my left, and behind me, I only see my friend Ryan. The third cyclist had completely vanished. As we crossed the intersection, Ryan said, "Was that your friend? Where did he go?" Looking behind us, we could see far into every direction, but he was gone. "Dude, I've never seen him before." We were both dumbfounded. "That was a freaking ghost cyclist," said Ryan. "I'm not exactly sure what happened. All that I know is that we were talking for mere seconds, and then we realized he was gone. It was such a random and mystifying experience, in a place where I'm sure countless cyclists have died over the years. I'm thankful my friend was there as a witness though, as I feel like we've bonded over this experience, and going forward, I will surely follow the ghost cyclist's advice." This cemetery was notorious for being really scary and supposedly haunted. After about an hour and a half of us pacing outside the entrance gates, no one had had enough nerve to go inside, so we decided to hightail it out of there, as we had already lingered too long and cops patrolled the area pretty frequently to keep kids out. It's the middle of the night, and we're on our way. My one buddy Jeff and I are bringing up the rear of our group, and suddenly we both stop dead in our tracks and point our flashlights to the left of us at the exact same time to the exact same tree. To me, it was like I saw a figure out of the corner of my eye, but almost instantaneously in my head. It's hard to describe. I knew it was there before I saw it, and when we lit the tree up it was gone. A white creature against the darkness, crouched behind and clutching the tree trunk. Dark eyes, really dark eyes. It was about 40 feet away. I was already scared shitless of the place, and we hadn't even gone in. I chalked it up to nerves and my mind playing tricks on me, but Jeff and I both described the exact same thing when our friends asked us what we saw. We get home later that night, and my other buddy does some digging on the internet about the cemetery, and pulls up an interview with a couple who described their experience exactly how Jeff and I did. No one had any prior knowledge to this creature before we went there, and somehow we came out seeing the same thing that a few other people had. It shook me up for a while, and still gets me to this day. I am still very much a skeptic about ghosts and ghouls, but my brother's house has a lot of creepy stuff happening on a regular basis. Some examples. Doors that have a metal L latch would just pop open as if someone had flicked them, usually when people were in the room changing. The refrigerator door would fling open by itself. We would constantly hear the sound of footsteps from the bedroom upstairs when nobody's there, and my old dog who died when I was younger had a very specific sneeze where she'd sneeze maybe 3 or 4 times in a row, and her collar would hit the floor and rattle. If the house is quiet, sometimes you can hear her walking in the kitchen or her sneeze. One time, my brother and his wife were setting up all the evidence of Santa and Rudolph on Christmas Eve night after the kids had went to bed. They both cut some celery and carrots and drank some milk. As they both left the kitchen and headed towards the living room, they heard a boom and turned around back into the kitchen. Where they just were was the plate and the stalk of celery, sticking straight up on its end, and the knife was jabbed into the stalk. Also, literally every kid who sleeps over has claimed they couldn't sleep because the man with the hat on is watching them on the stairs. More than one person has seen a figure like this walking down the stairs from the corner of their eyes. And my wife, who didn't know anything was weird about the house yet, went to feed the dog. This was while my brother was on vacation and I was at work. She ran out of there because she heard whispers coming from the hallway and swears she saw something moving in the shadows. My only experience that I personally witnessed, which I still think was because I was overly tired or something, was when I spent the night and was on my side facing the wall sleeping, and something whistled in my ear. It was loud enough for me to jump up and looked around. I didn't feel any breath on me, just the whistle. So I turned the other way and tried to fall back asleep, and then it happened in that ear too. I can't think of any more creepy stuff, but my dad, who is very religious, claims the house has evil spirits in it. My friend, who is a ghost hunter, said he would investigate the house if they wanted to, but my brother and his wife are too afraid of stirring things up, so they said no. I lived there for about 6 months and visit all the time and have never seen or heard anything. But who knows? I do live in upstate New York, where we have a lot of historic buildings and haunted history. But again, I've never seen anything spoopy enough to rustle my jimmies and claim that ghosts are afoot. This was 2015. I wasn't really actively looking, but would pop onto OkCupid every few weeks to see if anything interesting was in my inbox. Being female, I had a very active inbox. Sorry guys. I noticed an email from an interesting, fairly local guy. The email was alright, asking about polyamour, which I don't mind talking about if the person asking is sincerely interested and respectful. We get to chatting, and I had zero romantic interest, but thought this could be a friendship. And after a few months of talking, he found me on the Book of Faces, and asked if it was okay to send a request. I agreed. We'd been chatting and getting along well, and he seemed like a nice person. Little weird, but I'm a little weird myself. We continued to chat here and there for about 2 years, sent birthday greetings and just a casual friendship. He asked several times to meet and hang out, and I considered it, but at that time I was running my own business and worked about 70 hours a week, plus maintaining my home and raising a young child. And trying to balance 2 partners and an extremely needy, demanding workaholic client who had no boundaries, with 11 PM phone calls without a note of hesitation or remorse, it never occurred for me to meet up. But we kept in touch online. Late last year, a news story broke out about a man and his girlfriend murdering her young teen daughter. I never connected the name until a few friends contacted me and said, "Oh, I see you're friends with him. Did you see the news?" The news stories all use his legal full name, which is why I never connected the 2 dots. My then online friend of 2 years had beaten, sexually assaulted and strangled and then dismembered his girlfriend's teenage daughter, with the girlfriend's help. He made several statements since then, stating that he always had this fantasy, and that this child was very sexual, and that it wasn't fun murdering her, but he apparently thought it would be. Still sends a chill down my spine. I dodged a bullet big time. Be safe out there. You never know who's on the other side of a keyboard or phone call. I was 10 years old and lived in Germany. I used to live in a big apartment complex that had a ground floor and a spiral staircase that led to a downstairs with 2 bedrooms and a bathroom, where my brother and my bedrooms were. One day I came home from school when I was in 5th grade, and as soon as I opened my front door and got into the hallway, every door that I could see was opening and closing by itself, and you could hear a high-pitched screaming coming from the downstairs basement area. I basically shat my pants and bolted out the door and waited for my brother to come back from school. He was 4 years older and in the 9th grade. When I saw him coming with his friends, I told them what I'd seen, and they went inside and saw the same thing I did. I saw them running outside, and they told me that they were not going back in, and they were going to the town center for a while instead. I was too young, so I waited outside until my dad came home from work, which was 2 hours. I got so impatient, I ran inside my house and sat in the living room corner with the TV on until Dad got home. The events had stopped when I ran in, so it was basically just me watching the hallway for an hour with cartoons in the background. When we told my dad, he didn't really think much of the story, and nothing really came from it. Later that year, when I was trying to sleep, I woke up to the sound of someone digging through my toy box as if they were looking for something. As my night vision was adjusting, all I could see was a light/blackish outline of a little boy slowly moving through my things. I was frozen in fear for about 10 minutes, until I finally just jumped out of bed, turned the light on, and jumped back into bed. I spent the rest of the night laying in bed staring at my toy box until everyone was waking up for school and work. After this happened, I refused to sleep downstairs, and my dad moved me to one of the upstairs bedrooms. After living in that house for 5 years, everyone in my family living there, dad and brother, have seen some scary-ass stuff happen. My dad recalls seeing a dark man walking down the hallway when my brother and I were visiting our mum over the summer, and also recalls doors being opened downstairs that he was sure he closed. Friends that have stayed the night, and people who have stayed for a number of days here, have also seen the dark man in my old house. I think that my old place might just be haunted. There is a huge cemetery in a neighboring city that I loved to go visit prior to having kids. The Black Dahlia, among many others, are buried there. A few years ago, when my son was 3 and my daughter was 1, out of randomness one morning, I decided we would go to a cemetery to walk around and have a picnic. That specific one. I told my husband about my plan, packed up lunch, the mum bag, kids, and headed out the door. On our way there, my son asked me where we were going, and I told him we were going on a walk through a park and have a picnic. I did not tell him we were going to a cemetery. All the people that have passed are buried there. We get there and drive past the administrative building and main gigantic water fountain. Then we head up towards the top. But before getting there, I take a turn to head past some of the oldest graves, and as we round a bend, my son says to me, "Mummy, do you see all the people? Their hairs on my neck stand on end," as I ask my 3-year-old son, "Which people?" As you can imagine, there's not a single living soul outside my car in sight. And my son replies, "All the people on the hill waving at me." I look around and couldn't see a single person, and hadn't seen one since we entered the grounds. I told my son, "No, buddy, I can't see the people. But just because Mummy can't see them doesn't mean they might not be there. Let's go have our lunch somewhere else so we don't bother them." And basically noped out of there. Now I have no idea what my son may have been seeing, but just like I said to him, just because I can't see them doesn't mean they're not there. If he could actually see people waving at him, then I could not. I haven't the faintest if they were beckoning or waving at him with friendly or malicious intent. So yeah, screw that. I am, though, thoroughly creeped out. When I was younger, I had a bad nightmare that eventually roused me awake. My routine as a child, if I had a nightmare, was to call my parents from their room. Their room is just down the hall, so they would hear me, pick me up, and bring me into their room. This particular night, my dad was still at work. He has always worked fairly late, so my mum was the one who came into my room to pacify me. Keep in mind for later, my father was not home at the time. He did not come home until much later. She brings me into their room, and I was lying down on my dad's side since he wasn't home. My dad's side faces the door that leads into the long hallway. The door was open, so if I peeked over I could see the hallway from where I was laying. At one point, I had an eerie feeling. I just felt like something was there, and I had this strong impulse to look. I looked into the hallway, and sure enough there was a bright glowing white silhouette of a man. I couldn't discern too much of his features, but I could make out a friendly smile. He had glasses and was walking towards me. I recalled later that he looked like a younger version of my father that I'd seen in family photos. The figure seemed nice, but I was already terrified as it was. I quickly looked away. I let a few moments pass and garnered up the courage to look back out into the hallway. The figure was gone. I didn't tell anyone for years after that, until I was much older, when I finally told my dad about what I saw. He told me that he was supposed to have another brother, but that he died in the womb. I like to think that the figure I saw was him. From what I could make out, he did look a lot like my father. I was walking through a cemetery one day with some friends. Being teenagers, we were naturally curious and adventurous, so this is something we did often. As far as we could see, it looked like someone was praying next to a grave, but they kept looking up and around. Being about 100 yards away, it was hard to make anything else out, but they were wearing white clothes. They were a bit blurred, but I could tell their head was moving. I asked my friend next to me if she saw the same thing, and affirmed what I was seeing. At first I said it was a ghost, but she denied it, because it was a solid person, still too far away to say anything more. As we continued to walk, I kept my eyes on where they were, since I was the only one skeptical to know more. As we got closer, I lost direct sight of what I was looking at because of the other tombstones blocked my line of sight. Once we got to where the person who appeared to be praying and looking around, they were gone. There was literally no one else in this cemetery because it was around sunset and getting nighttime. We would have seen them walk away, unless they purposefully hid themselves very well from us, but I guess I'll never know.